Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Sandy Phillips. I'm the technical advisor in the school program at Spokane Regional Health District. And I've been involved in school plan review for probably about 25 years. So just wanted to share some of the things that I've learned sometimes the hard way. Uh, some of the challenges, and then also maybe provide a few tips that might be helpful to everybody. So first of all, I'm going to talk about school pre-construction, and then a little bit about school plan review and pre-occupancy inspections, and then move on to playground plan review and pre-occ inspections. And this is pretty high-level overview, so just trying to cover a lot of information in a fairly short period of time. So first of all, school plan review process. So pre-construction we found is really important part of the process. We have worked with our building departments for quite a few years now. We try to have them invite us to all the meetings for any of the projects that involve any of our programs in environmental public health. And one thing that we found out is that the International Building Code, and I have the link here, it does require that all laws have been met prior to the issuance of a building permit. And so the LHJ should be involved in the sign off of any project that involves regulations that we have some jurisdiction over. So we try to invite the building department or have the building department invite us to their pre-development and pre-application meetings, and we're pretty successful at that. We also provide written comments. We have a template here that we use, and if anybody would like a copy of that, feel free to let me know. So in this, for school projects, we include our school program comments, our food safety comments, if applicable, also liquid waste if it happens to be on a septic system, and then also our solid waste program for particularly remodels if there's demolition and that kind of thing. So one of the other things that we learned over time was ask for early plans. 50% plans, if you can get them for a whole brand new construction, are really great. It helps the process along. So that we found that they're pretty complete for our purposes. And so if we can get those and take a look at them, if there's any unusual issues in there, we can set up a meeting with the architect and the school representatives and kind of work out those details. And then the good thing about that is that then the final plans are generally more complete and correct, because if we don't do this, we don't tend to get a final set that has all of our changes like, GFI outlets that are required, that kind of thing. So, one of the things we would do is particularly ask about the curriculum. Do they have a maker space, robotics? Are they doing anything that might include soldering or and chemical lists for science rooms? Because we want to know if they need ventilation like fume hoods or drop down uh, tubes, or do they need eye washes and showers? And then look for anything unusual in the landscaping. Um, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. But and then anything different in the playgrounds, like the natural playgrounds. We had one school that put one in, and we were quite a few years ago, and yeah, didn't really fit all the playground standards. So that's a good thing to talk over with them beforehand. And we actually they had a landscape architect that was working on that project. So overall, the benefit is the project usually gets approved sooner, so it's a real benefit to the school. And then again, as I mentioned, the bid set usually are more complete and correct. So for school submittals for projects, we do have a checklist on our website, and I have the link on the next slide here. But the one important thing that we ask for from schools is to, or the architects really, or engineers, is to provide a written statement that the project will meet these 5 WAC requirements in the school regulation. So ventilation, heating, temperature control, sound control, and light, and then also meet the International Mechanical Code and Chapter 5152 WAC. And the reason for this is sometimes difficult from the plans to really verify that it's going to meet those sections. And if we have the architect engineer, state that it will meet those requirements, if there's an issue after construction, we can point to that they guaranteed that it would meet that. So it's not only good for us, it's also good for the schools because it gives them something to go back on and make sure that the architect engineer or the contractor ensures that the school meets those requirements. And hopefully they cover the cost of fixing it and the school's not left with that. So beyond that, we also require plans, spec books, spec sheets, particularly for things like emergency eye wash stations, make sure it meets the ANSI standards, and then for fume hoods and a few other things. So school plan review process, we have a checklist that we developed. Basically, it's based on the K-12 guide, all the items that are marked as being required for plan review. Our current checklist isn't updated to the 2025 changes to the checklist or to the K-12 guide. So that's on my to-do list to make sure that we're up to date on that. And then we also have that, so that would be the main checklist in the background there. The one in the foreground is actually a sheet that we put in our file just to make sure that we've dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's. We got a site sound level survey. We, received the WAC letter. Basically have done all the things and covered all the bases. So, also I wanted to note that DOH has a good plan review checklist on their SharePoint site, and I have the link on there for that. So something that's a little different that you may or may not have encountered in plan review is the OSPI D5 process and D7 process for school construction funding. And basically these are deadlines, hard and fast deadlines that schools must meet and receive approval from the local health jurisdiction to get their funding at that stage of the construction process. So it seems to be hit and miss whether that's asked for or not, but we have kind of gone through periods when we're being asked for that. And basically for the D5, we have to make sure that the school site that they've chosen is going to be appropriate. We need a site plan to look at. We need to have a site sound level survey, make sure that it's going to meet those requirements in the regulation. And then we want to make sure that there's no issues with the property being contaminated. And I have a link there to the Department of Ecology site hazard assessment, where there's a lot of history there on property and whether they had any contamination issues. So that's a really good resource to use. And it's possible that the property may need a phase 1 or phase 2 site environmental assessment. And if you've looked at the proposed regulation, new school regulation, actually a phase 1 will be required if it stays the same as it's written now. So anyways, besides that, also some of the other nearby features, that might have an impact. I think some of those have been mentioned today. Trains nearby, busy traffic, high voltage power lines, maybe industrial activities that might have emissions that would affect the school. We had a private school that started, they leased and started working on converting a building to a school, and there was actually a chrome plater just a block down the street, so not the ideal thing. Then any physical hazards like open water. So you also want to make sure acceptable water supply and waste disposal would be provided for the site. And again, Department of Health, they on their SharePoint site has a great approval checklist that you can use for the same process. So for D7, again, they may ask for the LHJ approval. We would want to have seen and looked over all of the 100% bid copy plans. We want to review them and make sure that they're substantially acceptable. Now, the deadline may come up before we're completely finished with the plan review, but as long as the major issues have been addressed, we have provided that approval. We just make sure that in our letter that we provide to the school to give to OSPI, that this approval is only for the D7 process, and that would be for the same for the D5. Make it clear that this is not final, approval for a building permit. And we have templates of those letters if anybody would like the copies of those. And then just a couple of challenges. I think maybe this was mentioned before too. Existing buildings, they may need a change of use by the building and planning department. A common one is a church that may have been used for childcare or Sunday school. As we found out, particularly for fire department requirements, that doesn't mean it's acceptable to be a school. And we kind of found this out the hard way with a school that was in a church, and they had a visit from the fire marshal who, knew that there wasn't supposed to be a school there. So had to go through a process with the building department after the fact to get that change of use. So when I have new schools approaching us, we make sure that they've already checked with the building department and been approved, because we don't really want to spend a lot of our time or their time and money going and approving a building and then finding out that there's too many hurdles to get that change of use. So it's really important for them to check into that. And then also mention private schools, they do need to be approved by the State Board of Education. And so they need LHJ and fire department approval. And we found out a few years ago that Board of Health had some that they had approved that we didn't know about, and vice versa. So had a really good exchange of information. I have a link here to their website. You can go and check for schools that you don't know about and then follow up, and vice versa, for the State Board of Education if they're interested, and they were a few years ago, in knowing about schools that they weren't aware of. Another challenge, CTE, is determining whether or not they need emergency eye washes or showers or fume hoods. Particularly, I found smaller schools that have a little science program. It's not usually an issue with the big public high schools, but there is really good information in the DOSH Directive 1300, which I have a link here to. And basically, there's a couple of questions that you need to have answered. Are the chemicals going to be corrosive and irritant or toxic? And then are students going to be exposed to them? And if so, then probably they do need eye washes and potentially showers, depending on quantity. So another thing to look at is the safety data sheets, and those have really good information, and they will tell you whether first aid treatment requires flushing, and if it does, then they're going to need at least an eye wash and potentially a shower if it's larger quantities that they're handling. In terms of fume hoods, again, safety data sheet, great information. Just look through it, see if mechanical exhaust ventilation is required, and if so, they probably do need an actual fume hood. And those things are expensive, so the schools aren't always wanting to put them in, but also need to remind them that if they don't put it in, it's going to really limit their use of chemicals in the future. So good to put it in during new construction. It's less expensive, easier that way. And if they think that they might be using chemicals that need those things. And then another thing to check is just other equipment that might be going into rooms that might generate some fumes and need some local exhaust ventilation. So that'd be things like 3D printers, laser printers. Recently had a school wanting to put a CO2 laser cutter in, and worked with Allie on that and determined they would need ventilation for that. Soldering, those kinds of things. And again, Department of Health has a great website on 3D printers. Just a few other things, kind of a little bit random, but this something that we found out. Well, unfortunately, there have been a few deaths in our county long time ago. Students sitting on railings up on a second level mezzanine and then falling off. So ever since that, and this is years ago, we've looked at the design of the railings for that type of design. It's usually something you would see probably in a two-story high school building where they've got it open to a courtyard or or maybe like a commons area below. Anyways, we do get, usually you have to request these drawings, but make sure that the railing is narrow or rounded, or maybe a beveled design that's not going to allow sitting on. The other thing is students could, lay their books on there or phone or something and have that knocked off and fall down on somebody's head down below. So just a little tip that makes the school a little bit safer. And then landscaping, come across a few challenges over the years. One is large boulders being placed out in a just for landscaping decoration, and always concerned about students getting on them and falling off of them. So want to find out the size of those and where they're going to be placed. Are they going to be kids going to be tempted to play on them? Think like you don't want them near a playground, for instance, to think it's part of the playground. And then courtyards, we've had some that had actually an amphitheater built in it, and got to look for, does it need a railing? Is it going to be a drop off on the backside, or is it going to be filled in with soil? And then things like terrace walls, may need railings. Large trees near a building, we look at the landscape plans and see what kind of trees and how big they're going to get, because we have had a few trees in the last few years with some of the bigger windstorms that we didn't used to get come over onto school buildings. So just a good thing to keep in mind. And then again, open water, creeks, rivers, ponds nearby should be fenced off.
Sandy, I'm going to give you a little 5 minute that you have 5 minutes left, but keep going.
Okay. So yeah, public clinics in schools, we've had those put in, and there's concerns with public not being able to get into school, having a separate entrance. Again, we had a public library that went into a school, so separate entrances, separate restrooms, and then early learning within like an elementary school, just to find out whether K-12 students would be using those rooms. It's not currently really clear on whether we could require plan review on those, but we try to have them go through plan review with us so that they have the flexibility in the future to use those facilities for all their students. And then pre-occupancies for new schools, pretty much we ask for everything to comply. We may give a temporary certificate of occupancy if, some minor things haven't been corrected and they need to open up for school. And usually those are all corrected within about 6 months. Remodels can be a lot more challenging. So particularly for sound levels in shops, we've had to have them make some mitigations, things like add insulation, reduce elbows, remove vibration. And occasionally the building department will provide a C of O without our approval. And if that's the case, what we've done is we just continue to add that onto our routine inspection, take a sound level meter, take a reading. And we've actually had a few that it took a few years, but they did correct those issues eventually. And for lighting, you can add lighting, task lighting, or you can use natural lighting as well to correct those issues, possibly. Quickly, playground plan review. Again, we have a submittal form. The important thing here is that we ask for a written statement or something out of the catalog that says all of the equipment meets the current CPSC and ASTM standards. And that's because during plan review, you can't really check everything, that everything complies. So that statement is really important if you find out later that you got head entrapments or things like that that are real issues. And then for unitary surfacing, this could sometimes be a challenge, but we want spec sheets that show the fall height and make sure that the depth of material they're going to put in will be sufficient for the tallest piece of equipment. And here's a link to our submittal on our website. A few challenges with playgrounds. I think, we've had a few schools want to design their own equipment, either a parent or we had a shop teacher that wanted to. Well, we've asked them to provide written verification that meets the standards, and usually they haven't gone ahead with that. Again, the natural playgrounds, Scott talked about this. One helpful thing is the ASTM F1487, Appendix X1. It does talk about how to it provides guidance on the application of the standards to evaluate those hazards. So that's a pretty useful thing to look at. Functionally linked equipment can be an issue. Really, you should be able, or children should be able to move from one item to the next, and that's not always obvious whether that could actually happen. And if you're not sure about it, what we've done is ask for a written statement from the designer. And then donated equipment, that's an issue too. And a lot of schools have found out that's not really worth accepting those because it may not meet the standards. It might be missing bolts or things like that, or have worn parts. So we discourage that. Finally, compliance on pre-occupancy inspections. Pretty much for new playgrounds, we want full compliance with the standards. The things that we find often are threads sticking out under the platform, maybe some head entrapment spaces. Height of the slide might be a little too high or low, and usually that can be fixed with the surfacing material. And if for some reason they don't correct it, again, we'll put it on our routine inspections until it is corrected. But usually we don't provide an approval letter unless it is fully corrected. And then surfacing poured in place, we are asking for some impact attenuation testing after installation. We are not always getting it, but we are trying to ask for that. It's good for us to have, and for the schools to have, to verify that it was installed correctly. And for engineered wood chips, make sure you have adequate depth. Yeah, and that's my presentation. If anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat or send me an email. Be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Sandy. This is a great presentation and much needed.